Hey, welcome to Highwire Brewing. If you're watching this, you're one of our newest team members. Congratulations. So we're based out of Asheville, North Carolina. We have 3 locations there. One in the South Slope in downtown, one in the Biltmore Village, which is our main brewing facility, and one in the River Arts District, which is more of a storage facility, but also includes a cool beer garden. Skipped it, but the original location is now our specialty beer and sour program run by Peter, one of our head brewers. Let's go inside and take a look at Knoxville's location. So we make beer. Beer is a pretty involved process, but it's a bunch of simple ingredients. You start with barley, malted barley. You start with water and hops, and you boil all that down into a wort, W-O-R-T. That creates the liquid that you send to the fermentation tanks that you then add yeast to ferment the product and create the alcohols. So yeast creates alcohol from eating sugar. And that's primarily what we're doing here. So in Asheville, we've got 2 locations that are brewing, and they have a very small staff that creates a very high quality product. So here in Knoxville, we have 20 taps, most of which are produced at, the beers that are attached to them are produced in the Big Top location, which is the location in the Biltmore Village. That is our largest brewing facility, our primary brewing facility. There are roughly 38 tanks, many of which are 90 barrels. A couple of them are 60 barrels, and 2 of them are 170 barrel lagering tanks. That is all to say it's a massive amount of beer that they can produce, and in that facility, 20 of them here on a rotating list. Let me walk you through the Big Top. So you begin in the grain room. They have a small room full of all of the barley that they use to produce whatever beer they're trying to brew. So they use an auger through a tube, and they move that grain into the mash tun, and they boil the barley down to produce a sugary liquid, trying to get all the sugar out of that barley that they can. And then they pump that to another tank called a lautering tank, L-A-U-T-E-R-I-N-G, lauter. The lauter is basically a rake, scrapes all the solids out of the wort, and then they pump the spent grain out so that local farmers can gather the product. From there, the wort is pumped to a whirlpool or a boil tun, which is where hops are added. And the longer hops are in the boil, the more bitterness you get. So you can start early and get a bittering hop and produce more pronounced bitterness out of the liquid, or you can do it later on toward the end of the boil and get more flavoring from the hops, or you can even wait into the fermentation tanks and get more of an aromatic character. From there, after the hops are boiled, the wort, is transferred to the fermentation tanks, where then yeast is added to the tanks to eat all that sugar up and create alcohol to produce the final product, beer. And that's what we want, and that's what our team is really good at producing. If you're familiar with any of our beer, you'll know that their consistency in their product is incredible. It's, in my opinion, second to none. So, ales and lagers. Ales get a different kind of yeast, literally ale yeast, that is a top fermenting, warmer temperature fermentation process. Usually takes around 2 weeks. For example, the bed of nails normally takes around 15 days. Whereas lager yeast is a cooler temperature fermentation where the yeast sits at the bottom and ferments, and that's just a biological difference between the strains of yeast. Lagers take around 50 days, if not a little bit longer. So lagers end up being a very smooth product just by the amount of time that they have taken to ferment. Examples of lagers include pilsners, of all varieties. You get your Czech, your Italian, your Mexican lagers, you've got American lagers. Ours are, we have two flagship lagers. We've got our Highwire lager, which is a more German ingredient leaning American lager, and then we have our 100% American ingredient lager, the Leisure Time. Both are very good. Lager just tends to have the tiniest touch of hoppiness to it, which does not necessarily equal bitterness, and we'll touch on that later.
So if somebody asks for an ale, but they're describing a lager, it's your job to listen to them and get them the product that they want using sales descriptive language.
So when you tap a new beer, get together with your teammates and talk about the flavor profiles, taste the beer, and figure out an effective and succinct way to move the product. Ultimately, that's our job behind the bar, is to move the product. So you've got a new beer tapped. It's on tap number 3. It's our low pitch hazy IPA. We're gonna briefly go over how to pour a beer. It's very important to put a reasonable amount of head on the beer. We're gonna pour a half pint. So you grab your glass. This is our half pint. You rinse it with the sprayer. I like to shake the water out of it. And I always check to make sure that there's no lipstick, because particularly on these glasses, lipstick sticks in it. It's very difficult to wash off. So you should have about 1 finger of head on a half pint. On a full pint, almost 2 fingers. And that's to increase the aromatics and the overall enjoyment of the beer. So let's pour a half pint. So now that you know how to pour a beer, let's talk about all 9 of Highwire's flagship beers. We're going to start in the order that we have it at the Knoxville location. We have the Highwire lager first. That's our German malt American lager. It is very smooth, very drinkable. It has just the slightest touch of hoppiness to it, which, be careful with the word hoppy. People who are looking for lagers are scared of that term. But that is truthful in its description. It has just a slight earthy hoppiness from the German hops that it uses, the noble hops, some of the traditional European hops. Number 2 in Knoxville is the Bed of Nails Brown Ale. This is an English-style brown ale. It's very approachable. Many browns tend to be on the sweeter end. This is more traditionally English. Way less sweetness, beautiful balance between the malt. You can taste just the slightest amount of hops in there. It's a wonderful beer. Great for a hot day in the summer even, and perfect for a fall evening like. Number 3, the Low Pitch Hazy IPA is it is a super hoppy IPA. It has 5 different hop varieties added at 6 different times in the boil and fermentation. However, the bitterness is very, very low, very sessionable, very drinkable, has a nice dry finish. It's a good one for people who might be looking for a blonde ale or something that's a little easier drinking. So all that to say, even though it's incredibly hoppy, it doesn't really taste like it, and that's cool. Number 4 on our board is the High Pitch IPA. That's a more West Coast style IPA. Very pronounced bitterness, but a really good balance between the malts and the hops. Superbly drinkable. It's a phenomenal IPA. Number 5 is the Double High Pitch. That is a double IPA or an imperial IPA. The terms seem to be interchangeable, but we call it a double IPA. It's another West Coast style, brewed to max out our system. It's incredibly hoppy. The IBUs are very high, but as I touched on earlier, the hoppiness doesn't necessarily equate to bitterness. The Double High Pitch drink's ridiculously smooth. At 9%, it's also the only flagship that we serve in a half pint. Number 6 is the Pink Lemonade, and that is one of our sour beers. It's a kettle sour, which means it's fermented with lactobacillus for a brief amount of time before it's just returned to the regular brewer's yeast, ale yeast. It is a wheated beer with lemon peel and raspberry, and the color is derived from blueberry. It's very approachably sour. Something I could crush on a boat all day long. Number 7 is the Mountain Water, and that is a unique brew. I haven't seen many things like it elsewhere, but it is one that we've made our flagship, and it's literally a light ale finished as a seltzer. So they started with a beer, and then they added dextrose to it that the yeast eats every last shred of the dextrose and gives the beer a seltzer-ish character to it, and people love it. That is something, I mean, we have customers who only drink Mountain Water, literally nothing else. So another cool one. Number 8 is the Leisure Time Lager, and as I touched on earlier, that is the American ingredient American lager. Very smooth, very crisp. It is our closest comparison to your typical domestic beer. It's Highwire's answer, and typically very successful. Very few people who are asking for a Miller or a Coors don't like the Leisure Time. It's a great beer. Number 9 is the Mountain Wheat, and that is a light wheated beer with just a hint of citrus at the end. Really, really nicely drinkable. It's fantastic. It's one of my favorites, and I hope that it remains a flagship for many years to come. Thanks for listening today. Hopefully you learned something. If you didn't, reach to me on Paylocity or email, and come see me in Knoxville if you're ever in town. I'll most likely be behind the bar.